John Caudwell, billionaire, businessman and philanthropist, best known as founder of the mobile phone company Phones for You, and more recently for donating £500,000 to the Conservatives at the last election.
It's been reported that there are no coronavirus tests available in the top 10 hotspots in England. Is this the world-beating testing operation Boris promised?
John Caudwell.
Well, I think they probably have failed to give a world-class system, but I think that somewhat misses the point altogether, because first of all, I'm not a great believer in testing and tracing.
Why not?
Purely and simply because the virus takes a while to develop to form a positive test. So you're going to be getting negative tests from people who are infected. And by the time you've got a positive test from those people who are infected, they've already infected lots of other people without knowing that they've got the virus. But even that's not the central point. The central point is that this virus was deadly, really deadly in April. It was killing around about 18% of people. If you look at the percentage of deaths now, there's only 0.4% of deaths. And of course, each one of those is tragic, but it's 0.4% of deaths instead of 18%. And it's the same worldwide. It's the same in Spain. It's the same in France. What that leads you to say is not worry about test and trace. Let's worry about why has this virus lost its potency.
But how do you know it's not going to get worse again?
How
do you know there won't be more deaths again, as they're seeing in other countries?
Fiona, my point is that there are 6 potential reasons why this virus is not killing people. We can list them.
Okay, briefly.
One is that young people are getting tested, and that's putting a huge amount of extra positives of asymptomatic young people who are not going to fall ill from it. The second point is that a lot of the people that were vulnerable have already died. The rest of the vulnerable people have been well shielded and well looked after by society. And then there's the possibility that, that the masks that we're wearing and the distancing that we're doing is reducing viral loads. And it's not proven, but the possibility of a reduced viral load might mean a reduced illness that the body and the immune system can cope with and fight off, whereas an increased viral load...
Just to be clear, would you get rid of testing altogether right now?
No, but let me finish the point, because the most important point of all is coming up, which is, has the virus actually lost its potency? Now, what I think we should be doing, the scientists and the government should be finding out the weighting between these 6 factors, and if it's number 6, which is the virus is losing its potency, we don't really need to worry, because the deaths will be less than they were with common flu. So we need to understand that. Would I scrap testing? No, I wouldn't, because it has a place to play in this, but it is not the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is understanding this virus, understanding those 6 factors, and then planning the action according to what we find.
Original question is this a world-beating testing operation, as Boris Johnson promised? And also we've heard John talk about whether or not it's the right way to go anyway.
Yes, I think, well, it's obviously clearly not a world-beating system, but I think where I'm going to come in is exactly that point that you made, John. Is this really what we want to do? And you just said, Fiona, that nobody's arguing that this is the way forward, that we must test. Well, actually, I will argue against that. I think that we're all talking to a particular narrative, to a particular plot, which is that the virus is this nasty thing, which may have diminished in nastiness, although I don't think that's true, because what I think is the virus was never really that nasty to begin with. And how are we going to deal with it? The only way we can deal with it is by somehow keeping it under control. The reason why this virus was able to kill so many people at that stage was because the risk of being infected among the vulnerable people was really very high in April, and that has diminished. And you mentioned 6 factors, but there's a 7th factor, which is that many of us are now immune to this virus. So what we need to do is really rethink...
Yeah, but I wasn't, just to answer that point, I wasn't bringing the immunity in. because I was talking about the ratio of deaths to cases. So that automatically discounts the immunity factor.
No, it doesn't actually, because what happens is when a population becomes immune, the risk of infection goes down. And so that what we really want to stop...
Well, that's the number of cases. I was just talking of the ratio of deaths to cases,
yes, but the risk,
not the cases
Well,
per
can I
population.
just interview for a second? Tyra was in our audience was saying, is herd immunity the way to go? Is that your view, Sunetra?
I'm just saying that there is this other alternative pathway, which is to build up herd immunity without sacrificing the vulnerable people. And
I absolutely agree with that. Now, I've been making the point from day one that we should have invested the money into protecting the aged and the vulnerable and let everybody else build up herd immunity. And if you take the number of deaths that would have been incurred then, I believe that would have been way less doing it that way than what we're doing cumulatively by the corona deaths that we've got, the cancer deaths that we're going to have, the stroke deaths that we're going to have, the suicides, the mental illness and the destruction of the economy. This is not lives or the economy, this is lives or lives. I think we've handled it wrongly from the beginning. I understand why Boris has done that, because he's followed the rest of the world, and you can't really go against the rest of the world, otherwise you'd be absolutely pilloried if you got it wrong. But I do believe we've got it wrong. I do believe we've been doing the wrong thing, and I do believe we're doing the wrong thing now. And we really need to understand how deadly is this virus. And from the figures I'm seeing, the virus is not that deadly for those 6 reasons. And the government and the scientists need to understand the weighting behind those 6 reasons so that we make the appropriate
So are you
decision.
saying that you know, I mean, we've got a professor of theoretical epidemiology. Are you saying you know better than Sunetra?
I didn't say that, did I?
Well, no, but just Sunetra saying she thinks it is
I'm
more
not
deadly than
saying
you're
that.
saying.
No, I'm agreeing with a lot that she said,
Can I-
but, you know, you don't have to be a professor to read the statistics and understand the facts. You just need to have a degree of intellect.
we know who's vulnerable, and we know about the enormous costs of some of these measures. How can we balance these? We can balance these by using our tests to find creative solutions to protect the vulnerable, not just shield them and shut them up and box them away, but ways of protecting them by testing people who they'll be in contact with and making sure that they won't pass the virus on to them, by creating the conditions whereby they are at a low risk of contracting this virus, which has not diminished in its potency, but is currently held at low risk. But we cannot hold it at low risk forever without paying these extreme costs. So
I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Sunetra, but I just wondered why you think that, or know that the virus is not losing its potency.
Well, because it doesn't mutate very quickly, it doesn't change much. There is no, I mean, we don't know anything for certain about this virus, but it hasn't really changed in ways that would biologically suggest that it has become less virulent. But what has happened is that levels of infection have declined considerably since April, and the way people die is when those infections leak into the vulnerable sector. Yeah. So that's what we need to stop.
And John Ashford, are you persuaded at all by what you're hearing?
No, not really. I mean, I completely respect what you're saying, quite obviously, and I'm very aware of your background in this field, although there are other epidemiologists who take a slightly different view to you, of course. And you are quite right that the numbers of deaths have been coming down. That is something we should celebrate. But it is a virus that spreads with speed and severity. And we also know that there are increasing numbers of people in younger age brackets who have caught the virus. And yes, they may not have been admitted to intensive care in a hospital, but they are suffering from debilitating long-term conditions as a result of the virus. Now, obviously,
but that's true of many viruses.
Sorry?
But that's true of many viruses.
Well, it's very true. It's not very pleasant to get it. It's not very pleasant for the people who've got it, because it's a multi-organ virus, isn't it?
That's also
and it
true
attacks
of
people.
flu.
Sorry?
That's also true of influenza.
We don't fire them. Let everybody get it, and let's just, you know. I mean, that is not. If I may say so.
Why is it
I don't
everybody
believe, if I may
gets
say
it?
so. If I may say so, I do not believe allowing people to be exposed to a virus that we know is deadly or or creates serious long-term health problems for them is the right judgment
Then why don't
for us
you
to make
shut
as
down for
policymakers.
flu?
Is the right judgment for us to make as policymakers. We are trying to protect people, to save lives, and to drive down infections as best we can. And
But
the way
it's
in
the
which we
age
do that, is by investing properly in a decent testing and tracing system. We do not have decent testing and tracing at the moment, which is why we've got hundreds of school children starting this school term in the same way they ended the last school term, at home and not in education.
There's lots of
can I just
will-
make this point, because I think you're just on a party political broadcast. You know, you've listened to what I've said, you've listened to what an expert said, and you've dismissed it completely because you want to nail the government on test and trace.
No, I want to save lives.
And that's not fair, because
I want to save lives, actually.
No, you don't want to save lives.
I do actually want to save lives,
No, because
John.
we're killing...
You just want to let the virus rip through the population.
No, absolutely not. We're killing people with cancer. We're killing young people with cancer to protect young people who won't die of this virus. We absolutely need to protect the aged, the infirm. I've been saying that for 6 months. We have to, whether we call it shielding or what sort of protection, we have to protect them to the nth degree and let everybody else carry on with the work, and there will be less deaths overall, I have no doubt whatsoever. But you won't even listen to what we're saying, because you want to push your party political broadcast that the Conservative Party are failing miserably.
Well, they are failing on testing. You said that as well.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that. But what I don't like is the fact that you're just sticking...
Why are you criticising me when I point it out, when I make the same point you
No, what I
made?
don't like is that you're sticking to your guns, that you don't even listen to the argument that this virus, that there's a different way of doing this virus.
I just disagree.
How has the Tories' Brexit plan gone from being oven ready to a threat to our economic and political integrity?
John Caudwell.
Thank you for that. Well, I don't think that it was, first of all, oven ready, but...
How would you have described it?
It was partially developed. There was a long way
partially
to
frozen
negotiations, because if you look at what Brussels are doing, and I call them the Brussels bully boys, they were taking £8 billion per year net off us. They were benefiting by £80 billion worth of trade benefit in trading with Britain. That's 80 billion better trade for them than we were receiving. They were then plundering our fishing waters, and all that with the £8 billion. Now, any commercial-minded businessman on the planet would say, yes, we'd love to do a free trade deal with Britain. We'd absolutely adore it, because we're going to gain 80 billion worth of trade deficit. And yet, they're bullying us and beating us up. They beat Theresa May black and blue, and they've continued trying to do it all the way through. Fortunately, Boris rose to the challenge and fought back. And this behaviour by Brussels, I find absolutely abhorrent. But of course, the reason they're doing it is because they've got no option. Because if they gave Britain an easy ride, the other European countries would see that, and potentially there'd be an exodus, possibly a mass exodus, possibly a complete collapse of the Union. And of course, that is not what Brussels wants. So they will use any means, fair or foul, to protect their situation and make it look to any country that dares to want to come out of the Union that they will be crucified in the process. And look what they've done just recently, threatened to cut off all Britain's food supplies to Northern Ireland. I mean, that's appalling.
They're doing all this. Why are they doing that? Is this time, when we're in the midst of a global pandemic, we can have disagreements about how we should respond to the pandemic, but I think we can all admit that it's a pretty big issue that needs the undivided attention of the government. Why are they doing this now, when we need to be getting on with dealing with the coronavirus crisis?
Well, I think there's a lot that's been misunderstood about these negotiations from day one. You know, you don't negotiate with your hand behind your back. We should have negotiated with Brussels from a really tough line right from the beginning, and we would have got this done, because every single factor is compelling why the EU should do this deal with Britain on fair terms. And the only non-compelling factor is the possible collapse of the EU as every country starts to think, do we really want to be part of this shambles? And it's that that is causing the EU...
So why is the EU not doing that then? Is it because the UK government is just poor at negotiating then? Why is, if the EU is so keen to have this deal, why have we not got one? I'm afraid Theresa May and the Conservative government were dreadful. I used to put my head in my hands in horror at the way we were negotiating with Brussels. You don't negotiate with bullies by cajoling them and saying, please, and can you do this? You fight bullies with the only weapon that they understand, and that's force, which is what Boris has done. And now they should be doing a deal with us. They should be saying, yes, you can have your international fisheries waters back. What did they say? They said you can have your waters back, but you'll never export another piece of fish to the whole of Europe if you do. Right. Well, it's disgusting. Well, I'm sure if Michel Barnier was here, and of course, Michel, if you're watching, you're very welcome to come on the programme. I'm sure he'd deny that he is, or that they are acting as bully boys. Thank you very much to my panel for coming in our first show after summer. Great to get started. Thank you all very much for coming on.